without further ado, let's hand it off to Vanessa to introduce us to Foresight, IFTF, and IFTF Vantage.
All right, thank you, Sean. Well, excited to see all of you today, although virtually, and just want to share a little bit more, of course, about IFTF and by extension, IFTF Vantage. So for those of you, if you aren't familiar with Institute for the Future, we are one of the oldest, if not the oldest, futures organizations in the world. Started in the 60s in the Bay Area in Palo Alto, California, and we really focus on helping people think systematically about the future. So communities, businesses, government, social impact organizations, you name it, all over the world. We've worked with many of these entities, and it's been a really great opportunity to explore future possibilities. So that said, if you are unfamiliar with strategic foresight or what strategic foresight might mean, this is the definition that we use, that it's a set of tools, processes, and importantly, mindsets. It's really about how you think about and anticipate the future so that you can be able to make decisions under conditions of uncertainty. I don't know about you, but certainly I have found myself living amid a lot of uncertainty in the last 2 years. And I'm sure that might be what brought many of you here today. And so happy to share a little bit more about how Vantage can really help you to be able to do that even better within your organizations. So yes, while we are focused on making decisions, it's a very, hard thing that we're dealing with uncertainty. It's also about this sort of play space, this imaginative space, and this ability to imagine how the world could be radically different and transform in ways that might seem really difficult or impossible to grapple with today when we think about how hard things might be, but nonetheless become possible when we sort of think about over a longer term time horizon, looking at a larger amount kind of data and stories and anecdotes and being able to imagine things being different. So outside of the imagination space, the future is useful, especially for organizations. One, it helps you to be able to challenge assumptions about how you might understand even the present, much less the future. It's an opportunity to bring people together to build a shared long-term perspective. All of you now, if you did not know what strategic foresight was before, you certainly have a little bit of a taste of it now after being here today. And that said, it presents a way for you to be able to apply those tools and importantly, those mindsets to be able to anticipate what could be coming on the horizon in terms of threats. And of course, what many people want to hear about when they talk about the future, what are the opportunities on the horizon and how can we be prepared to pursue those opportunities within our organizations and continue to be impactful. So this is a quote that we often share in a lot of our trainings and a lot of events, and it really begins to capture one thing that we always tell people, which is that we can't predict the future. But that said, there are elements of the future that we can see today, and this quote really captures that the future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed. And a lot of the work that we do at IFTF is really focused on, yes, understanding what are the long-term trends or what is shaping the world, markets, communities that are affecting us today, but really to look for those unequal, unevenly distributed points of the future that are happening today, those sort of weird and provocative disruptions that could point to how the world might transform, but sort of given the right mix of ingredients and importantly, actions to build that future as well. So of course, depending on where you were maybe seated around early 2020, something like a pandemic might have come out as a complete shock, but we do know that there were numerous experts that were warning of a pandemic. I know even in my own work history, one of the first jobs I had after college was working at a government contractor, and one of the big projects that I worked on for a bit was talking about, the tagline was something to the effect of know what to do about pandemic flu. So this was in 2006, even as a fresh college graduate, that this was something that was going on for a long time, that people knew that pandemics were coming, but even with knowing what was possible and even knowing what was likely in this circumstance, we still weren't ready as a country and certainly not ready as a globe. And so it's not just about thinking about the future, it's really about how can you use that information and imagine those possibilities so that you take action in the present so that you can build the futures that you want to see. So that really underlines a lot of our work at IFTF, that we really aren't just focused on imagining those possibilities, but we really want to move you to insight, to that aha about what you've seen in terms of stories of the future so that you can begin to take action. So this is our cone of possibilities, which illustrates a lot of that sort of challenging sort of issues that might come with starting to imagine the future. So, a lot of us are in this space, you might be doing strategic planning right now. It's toward the end of the year. Maybe you're trying to look ahead toward, we might have started at the beginning of this year and thought, well, it's post-pandemic, and now we're seeing that there's a new variant. So maybe we're not as post-pandemic as we thought we were. And so you live in the more probable world. You're looking at kind of what's coming out tomorrow. You're looking at what's coming out next quarter, or maybe even next year. Futures really encourages us to kind of broaden our cone of possibilities. So as we are looking out over a longer period of time, we're trying to imagine what is possible. And basically, as you look farther out, there become more things that are possible and plausible as you adopt a more longer term time horizon. And of course, what many organizations are really interested in is not just what becomes possible, but really how do you get to a point of what is preferred? So being able to identify out of the wide range of future possibilities, what is it that your organization would prefer to see be real? What are the opportunities that you would prefer to realize? What are the threats that you would like to avert as you continue to grow as an organization? So this is a quote from our colleague, Jake Donegan, that is oftentimes repeated, sometimes incorrectly, but here it is captured, that summarizes that it's better to be surprised by a simulation than blindsided by reality. One of the things that I know that we've shared a lot on previous webinars before is that back in 2009, so before I joined Institute for the Future, we had a 10-year forecast, and one of the scenarios in which was exploring a global pandemic that emerged in 2019. And it was done through a sort of more participatory forecasting kind of gaming scenario. So people were able to sort of immerse themselves in that simulation and imagine how they would react, imagine what sort of resources that they were going to need. And obviously, creating a scenario of a global pandemic that emerges in 2019 is rather eerie, and it seems like it's a prediction. Again, we don't predict the future, but it's a way of a lot of people have come back and said that, going through that simulation helped them be prepared for the pandemic that did eventually emerge in 2020, so that they weren't completely blindsided by how shocking and disruptive something like a pandemic could be. And it's not just pandemics that are helpful by kind of running through these simulations, it's other events and sort of occurrences as well. So this is the window from our office in Palo Alto. Another quote that we like to share a lot. This comes from a professor at University of Hawaii that created a way of understanding scenarios, actually alternative futures. And he says, any useful statement about the future should at first seem ridiculous. So if you've taken a look around our website on any of the numerous forecasts or scenarios that you might have written, I'm sure that you might have had that sort of initial reaction that, whatever it is that you're reading or whatever video that you're seeing does really seem ridiculous. But it's important to have that sort of ridiculous sort of feeling and sentiment about what you're seeing, again, so that you can provoke those insights and get you to a point where you are taking action to move toward those preferred futures that you would like to see, whether it's in your personal life or in your professional life. And so it's really important that as you are engaging with strategic foresight, that it does need to seem and feel ridiculous in order to provoke you. So here's a little bit of some of our ridiculous futures. In case you can't read some of the text on here, the sort of blurrier text, this comes from a report that IFTF wrote in 1971, really looking at the table says a brief description of potential home information services. So it's basically looking at the very beginnings of the internet in 1971 and what could emerge if this technology were to be out in the world. What sort of new behaviors, what kind of new markets, what kind of new preferences and values might emerge. So some of the things that the report highlights that become possible with this thing that's not quite the internet yet, but is the precursor to it, is shopping transactions. So how can store catalogs be part of these sort of home information services? Looking at person-to-person services. So how can there be paid work at home? Or looking at things like plays and movies being available from a video library. Well, of course, this is in 1971. So all these company logos that you're seeing here, Amazon, Netflix, Upwork, Fiverr, were completely unimaginable or ridiculous back in 1971. But we all know, and I'm sure subscribe to or use many of these services virtually every day. And so yet another example of why it's important to be able to anticipate the future. These things weren't going to emerge on the horizon in 1972. They weren't going to operate on that quick of a time horizon. But by being ready and looking at what was going to contribute to these things being able to emerge, these companies were able to obviously capitalize on some really massive markets. And it can be the same thing for your organization as well, that be beginning to anticipate the future. It may not happen tomorrow, but it does put you in a place to be able to build toward opportunities that you would like to see and avert maybe threats that you would not like to see. So there's, as far as strategic foresight goes, there's some evidence of how effective it is for, in particular, this research is looking at corporations. So this study comes from a set of 81 for-profit companies based in Germany. And the researcher, Renee Warbeck, who also contributed to our playbook for building foresight capacity. So if you haven't seen that, that's also a really helpful resource for organizations. But Renee Warbeck did this 7-year study where he followed 81 for-profit companies and really kind of ranked them on their sort of practice and how they've embedded corporate foresight in their functions. And then he looked at their firm performance. He was trying to see what is the relationship, or what could be a relationship or correlation in this case, in between using corporate foresight, or strategic foresight rather, within these corporations, and how these firms performed. And what he found is that the corporations that were using the strategic foresight most saw a 33% increase in profitability and a 200% increase in growth, as compared to corporations who are either not using corporate or strategic foresight at all, or using it in a much more limited fashion. And so, the future obviously is important for the reasons that I've stated, but if you are working for a corporation and attending this, this is the bottom line that we're talking about, that future looking and future anticipating organizations ultimately perform better over the long term. Like, this was just a 7-year study, but I would imagine if you doubled the time horizon, you would see rather dramatic differences as well. So all that is to say, IFTF Vantage really helps organizations be able to anticipate the future. So this is a year-long partnership that consists of a number of different benefits that you can see here on the screen, but I'm going to summarize these in a way that's easiest as possible for you to be able to take back and talk with other folks in your organization if they weren't able to attend today. So our research agenda focuses on releasing our annual map of the decade. So this is a 10-year view over the entire horizon of how the landscape might change over the next decade, organized around a particular urgent future that we are exploring. In this case, next year, which I will get to shortly, we're looking at the decisive decade, the reevaluation of everything for our annual map of the decade. The partnership also includes attendance at our annual 10-year forecast summit. Of course, in the last few years that has been virtual, and so it's been a really amazing opportunity to bring a lot of your colleagues together to have that dedicated space to focus on the future and the that time horizon, and be able to imagine what would your organization look for in preferred futures. So both with the 10-year forecast summit as well as the annual map of the decade, there are dedicated events to be able to use the research as a provocation to look for insights about your organization and what you'd like to see. Along with that, throughout the year, we also have 2 different digital platforms that our partners have access to and use. So Vantage Point contains our current research, as well as a space to be able to connect with others within your organization, as well as others who are part of the partnership, to be able to learn from each other. And then we also have Future Factors, our Signals platform. So that quote that I shared with you about the future is here, it's just not evenly distributed, really speaks to signals of change. So those disruptions, those innovations that are happening today, that if they were to scale in importance or to scale in scope, could really point to the world being differently. So Future Factors is our platform to be able for folks to contribute signals and collaborate to be able to make sense of them together, to be able to curate signals at an organizational level, even if that's something that you would like to do, if they're particular, either something like a technology or an area or an industry that you're really focused on looking at and trying to sense what could be emerging in the space of interest that you are focused on. So that's something that's very popular with our partners. One, because it allows more connection across their organization itself, and creates a sort of shared language and understanding of how people are thinking about the future, as well as the opportunity to learn from other partners. So things partners that might be out of a geography that you operate in or out of an industry that you're operating in, and having more of those sort of cross-disciplinary kind of conversations and insights. And last, but certainly not least, every IFTF Vantage partner has a foresight guide. So this is a researcher within the organization that is your primary point of contact. So they really help you to make sense of the research that you have and kind of help you see insights relevant to your organization. They'll point you to resources. So maybe researchers, if you have deeper questions, again, helping you like after events and looking for insights for your organizations and being that really great sounding board for you as it comes to strategic foresight, and connecting you with other resources that might exist across the organization, like Foresight Essentials, our training opportunities, or even more custom research that you might want to have for your organization as well. So there, your foresight guide is kind of like your person who helps you to better anticipate the future. So as I alluded to before, here is our 2022 research agenda, the decisive decade, the reevaluation of everything. And I think that a lot of you can kind of feel this as well as you look at like what's going on in the world and where we are going or maybe not going, that we have a lot of critical decisions that are on the horizon that really point to ways in which we are trying to identify either new values or looking at how values might be shifting. And these critical decisions that we are going to make over the next decade are really going to point to how we reevaluate and how we hope to act in a way to build the world that we want to see. And so next year's research is specifically looking at this notion of shifting values, and also looking at that notion of shifting values through the lens of place. So our map of the decade will really look at a lot of those shifting values and kind of future forces that are changing on the horizon, and what sort of foundations and dilemmas and trade-offs are happening within those future forces. And then we'll also have more forecasts later in the research year that are looking at what are the sort of emerging behaviors and emerging kind of changes in the ways that we are behaving and interacting through the lens of place that point to how values might be changing and how we might begin to anticipate what's needed to support those changes in values and what we value and who is valuing what and why. So you can see a summary of our research deliverables here. This is also available on our website, and I'm sure that this will be included in the follow-up from this session that is also being recorded in case you want for future reference. But we have a 4-page PDF that summarizes all of the research agenda from 2022. So in case you have any other questions about that, that will definitely be coming for you as well. But just wanted to begin to wrap things up. Again, that one of the major values of strategic foresight is beginning to anticipate the future. And so we use this 3 horizons framework a lot in our research to begin to push organizations who predominantly might live in this sort of more short-term world of sort of 1 to 3 years to really begin to think more medium and long-term and how that might affect your organization and how you maybe need to think differently about time in terms of the activities that you are investing in, the activities that you are focused on. So it's not just about operations and management, but really beginning to think about innovation spaces and how you might begin to have dedicated space for that sort of strategic foresight capacity in your organization to have a vision of the future that you would like to pursue and have that permeate throughout your organization as well. So this isn't just about activities, it's also about mindsets, as I alluded to earlier, that I'm sure many of you get a lot of pressure about being, again, those short-term time horizons, that kind of management mindset, but really strategic foresight helps you be able to occupy and think about a lot of different kinds of mindsets, the entrepreneurial mindset and visionary mindset as well. So those longer-term time horizons too. And it also helps you to be able to think about scale. So not just looking at the management of day-to-day of the products that you are offering, but also how your organization is operating, what sort of innovation spaces are you operating in. And again, that sort of visionary, maybe more speculative space, that space that seems and feels very ridiculous. But it's really important if you're going to achieve something that is going to be more transformational to have that kind of more system level visionary kind of activities in your organization as well. So I think I mentioned this earlier too. A lot of those, the sort of organizations thinking differently about time and also thinking differently about scale comes from some of our research that we did in 2020. That was kind of forgive me for saying, a meta view. I don't mean in the Facebook way, of strategic foresight. So really beginning to look at how can organizations be more future ready? How can organizations embed strategic foresight more in their organization? And so this is another really helpful resource, and based on research that we did in 2020, looking at a wide variety of organizations all over the world and how they are practicing a strategic foresight and how they're looking to do that in a way that's impactful for them. So it's another helpful resource. Just to close things up quickly, this is a small sample of all the organizations that we work with. As I mentioned before, a lot of different corporations, social impacts, government agencies, probably any entity you can think of. We've worked with someone, either maybe them or someone like them. And so we are not specialists, we are generalists as researchers, but it's a really helpful complement for you and your organization to begin to think broader and have more of an outside in perspective, both in terms of the systems that you're interacting with, as well as the longer time horizon, and really beginning to think in ways that might be less linear, more nonlinear, that might point to things to anticipate. Here are a few case studies on how we've worked with organizations in the past. I'm not going to go through these completely in detail, but again, feel free to send either myself or Sean more questions about more specific examples of how we've worked with organizations. It's really wide ranging, but I can tell you with IFTF Vantage, there's a lot of opportunity for, yes, the research, which of course is front and center, but also the community building and connecting with other of your peers that are really trying to learn how to be more future ready, more anticipatory, and by extension, of course, more strategic and visionary in how they are operating as an organization. So here are a few screenshots of our digital platforms. So you can kind of see some of these. As I mentioned before, Vantage Point has access to all of our current research and forecasts, all of our webinar recordings. It's also where you find all of our events. We have a wide range of community events for IFTF Vantage partners for them to participate in. And again, our Future Factors, our signal scanning platform, which allows for IFTF Vantage partners as well as staff use this too. So it's an opportunity to see a lot of signals, a lot of different signals that are curated by experts, that are curated by other organizations that are also trying to build their foresight capacity and begin to add to that for your organization as well. So I'm going to wrap things up so that we have time for questions. But again, this is the contact information for Sean, who is an amazing host, and myself. If you have any questions about Vantage or other programs or things at IFTF, please feel free to email us. And I'm going to stop sharing so that I can see what questions we have.
The first question comes from Sanjay. He writes, we are a CONBIT PBC, a Delaware-based climate action public benefit corporation looking to catalyze food security and equity across the globe by localizing food production. Are there opportunities for partnerships for organizations like us? We're looking at food and regenerative farming futures and want to drive the change that's required.
Yes, a lot of opportunities. Our Food Futures Lab is one of our probably most active and definitely looking at a lot of those things that you've highlighted. I forget the name of the person, sorry, who asked the question. And I think that Sean is maybe mentioning a few things, but we've done a number of different projects that are looking at things like regenerative farming, supply chain management, other ways of engaging ways, how does food and climate basically interact? So you can see probably some past research that we've had before related to climate. I know we have a climate action map that we've done with the World Bank. There's a lot of food futures work also on our website. And often especially through IFTF Vantage, there are other, depending on what logos that I can't fully remember that are on there, but there are a number of different IFTF Vantage partners that are also either food companies or companies that are really trying to look at that nexus of sustainability and food. So it's a really good opportunity to learn from people who are trying to grapple with those big questions, and also learning from other spaces that might be grappling with that as well.
Perfect. Thanks for that. And I know John's been writing to Sanjay in the chat here. So based on what Sanjay asked and what Vanessa responded with, and with what John can put together, there'll be a thoughtful email that covers all of the existing materials that are in your zone, as well as ways that we can work with you. On that note, if we don't cover your question, or you want to ask a similar question that Sanjay just asked, send it directly to us and we'll go through and see how we can best assist you. Another question here is, how can I access the entire Future Readiness Playbook that you just showed a couple of minutes ago? The quick answer is, we have a download link.
Yes.
Within a few days, we'll have a formal destination URL that provides context to it. So if you do want direct access to that, email us and we'll make sure you have that as soon as that landing page exists, so that you can download it. Vanessa, did you want to add any context? Because I spoke over you. Sorry about that.
Oh, no problem at all. I was only going to add too that part of what comes with the partnership that I mentioned earlier were community events. And so in particular, one of the event series that we do is aligned with the playbook, so Future Ready Organizations. And it's an opportunity for our partners to be able to talk to each other and learn from each other about how they are applying a lot of either the lessons or the insights or the practices in the playbook in their organization. And so it becomes another opportunity to, yes, not just have the text of what's there and the research of what is there, but really to apply it within your organization and begin to learn and build your foresight capacity. So I would say, definitely download the playbook when that link is up. But I also want to highlight that too, that one of the benefits of being this partnership is that you don't just have to read about it. There's an opportunity to learn from others, so you can maybe avoid some mistakes and or just trigger other ways to think about how to build the foresight capacity of your organization.
Perfect. Next question would be, can I access IFTF Future Factors outside of the IFTF Vantage partnership?
John, do you want to answer that one?
I'll answer that one. Yeah, sure. So the Future Factors has been around for a couple of years internal to IFTF. And before we made it available to our Vantage partners, we used it for a while. Last year, we made it available to the partners. So as part of the annual investment into IFTF Vantage. And a few weeks ago, we started to make it available to our foresight training alums, people that have gone through the curriculum of training and now have familiarity with what a signal is, what it isn't, so that they can start to add to the database of signals. So it is a paid program outside of IFTF Vantage for a specific niche of people right now, the alum of foresight training. Early in Q1 of next year, we're going to start to make it available to others. There will be fees associated with it. So if you do want to access it, specifically the Vantage, IFTF Future Factors Signals platform, just let us know and we can provide you with the details once we have them all set in stone. Here's a question that's more about usage. How do you balance the needs of the future with the market viability of today?
This is a question that we get a lot. I'm going to give you unfortunately, the answer, which is that you need to do both. It's why I think someone highlighted, they said that they were happy to see the 3 horizons framework. It's part of the reason that you try to build that foresight capacity across your organization, because you don't want to trade today for tomorrow. There is a tool, I know that even in our Foresight Essentials, for example, that we talk about a lot, like the 2 curves framework. And it really talks about how, today's way of doing things that might be sort of descending or falling out of favor. And then tomorrow's way of doing things that are emerging. And a lot of the questions that come up with, well, when do you decide to move to the second curve? And of course, that's the trickiest piece. But part of the benefit, or I would say one of the main benefits of being able to anticipate the future, is that can be a constant negotiation. There's ways to kind of test when you need to move there, because you don't want to sort of leave things on the table that are happening today that are more market viable. And you also don't want to sort of mortgage your future by solely focusing on what's happening today. And so one of the main benefits that, again, of that future impacts performance is that you do have some dedicated space, you have some dedicated tools, you have some dedicated strategies, and importantly, those mindsets of, yes, I'm thinking about market viability and what my customers are going to want and need today, but also at least some part of that dedicated to, well, how do I think about much more long-term and what might be transformational that I need to at least be starting to take some steps toward today. So the balance comes from having the conversation, creating the space, building those mindsets, learning the tools, learning the strategies, and you know, sort of bit by bit beginning to move through that.
Perfect. It is the top of the hour, 1 o'clock on the Pacific time zone. So I'm going to invite people that need to leave to go to a different meeting or off to personal, family, other engagements, obligations to depart. Know that we're going to continue to record and ask maybe 1 or 2 more questions before we close up for the time being. So if you need to depart, have a great, wonderful day, rest of your week. Another question that I see coming in is, how do I build a signals practice within my team?
That merits a really broad, complex answer, or not complex, a longer answer. A short answer that I can give you is, you know, join IFTF Vantage. I have to say that. But outside of that, building a signals practice in your team can be something that could be as lightweight as dedicating maybe the top 15 minutes of your team meeting hour for someone to talk about 2 or 3 signals. Or it can be something that's much more extensive. Again, as part of our community events for next year for IFTF Vantage, we are helping our partners to be able to do this very same thing and build their own kind of signals club and their own signal scanning practice within their organization. And so that will definitely be an opportunity to learn more ways to tailor that to the needs of your organization.
Perfect. And I think we're out of questions. So as a recap, this session's been recorded. It'll be sent to all the registrants. So if anyone who's still on wants to share it, you're able to do that. So the recording is there. All the links that we provided in the chat will also be shared with you in a follow-up email. And then we're going to be open to any kind of questions or comments that come our way. So do reach out and make sure you do connect with us.
There are a couple more questions.
Oh yeah. Vincent asks, how do I make my company embrace and master foresight as a way of living? How do I encourage my company to embrace and master foresight as a way of living?
There again, a very complex question. You know, we've mentioned the playbook. You know, this was certainly something that came up a lot. You know, winning over skeptics and communicating the value of foresight. So I would point you to that resource for some pointers there. You know, because the longer answer is that depends on a lot of different factors that I can't capture with just that question. But that definitely is a helpful resource to answer that.
Yeah. David Kim asks, do you have a nonprofit rate for the partnership? I'll take that one. We do look at each organization and their ability to pay. Some organizations that legally are nonprofits, we may not consider them a nonprofit just because it's set up as a tax vehicle where they do have billions of dollars of profit and revenue. So we take each instance case by case. So what we can do, David, is follow up with you to find, I'm not privy to which organization you're with right now, but we'll follow up and make sure that we give the formal response based on the kind of organization that you hail from. Right, Sanjay. Yeah, there is a little bit of a slide there. I'll give 5 seconds to see if anyone else pops in a question there. As we have attention of a good almost 24 people. If not, then we'll do what I indicated. Oh, yep, Sanjay has another question. We welcome it. He's madly typing. Comment so far, scenario planning and Vantage program. How to combine them. How do you combine scenario planning and the Vantage program? What I'll say is within IFTF Vantage, every year we choose an IFTF research methodology to really blow out and discover, inform how to use that tool, how to use that framework. In the past, we've looked at scenarios as a way of doing that. I can't remember how many years ago was the last time we really explored scenarios as a medium.
2019.
2018, 2019. But every year we choose one tool framework to really explore, to share with our community, that as a tool. To really dive into scenario building, we strongly suggest going through our foresight training that's specifically focused on scenario building. It's modeled after our what happens next research that looks at a post-COVID scenario. So we take that as the content base and then explore scenarios using a number of tools and frameworks through coursework. So
And I
there's
think
formal
Sean-
training around that.
Yeah, so he's looking for how could maybe Vantage and that formal training be combined. So he's looking specifically at the scenario building training.
Right. So it's a really great practice to both know the process and the techniques of foresight, as well as having access to ongoing content from such a vehicle as IFTF Vantage. So they combine really well. And that's something that you and John, who've already begun conversing, I see, to talk about and explore more, but they go really well hand in hand. Futures for Managers books. I can't comment on other organizations' books because I've never read them personally. I just know that we have a number of staff books that have come through that really help explore things from a leadership perspective. Books from Marina Gorbis and Bob Johansson come to mind. So we can provide that in a follow-up link. But really the go-to one for any manager, director, VP and above who wants to really understand and explore foresight and its utility within an organization should read the playbook that we've shared earlier. So we'll make sure to have that playbook as a link to access in the follow-up emails, as well as some of the books that Marina and Bob have published over the last few years.
Yeah, and I think I'll just highlight too, I know I didn't speak as much about the research methodology for the playbook, but we did do a quantitative survey collaboration with an organization based in Germany that I know specifically was looking at managers and executives using corporate foresight. And so that, at least the statistics can be a resource in thinking about like what might be the unique demands or sort of constraints of managers and futures. So again, the playbook is the best resource.